joining me today. In this presentation we will be looking at ADHD. So what will that include? We will look at ADHD and how it may affect a child. We will also be looking at the signs and symptoms and how it is diagnosed and how it can be managed. So let's start with looking at some common misconceptions. So for these, think if the answer is true or false. ADHD is an abbreviation for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. This is true. However, there are actually three different subtypes of ADHD, including predominantly inattentive, predominantly hyperactive impulsive, and combined presentation. ADHD is a problem with laziness. This is false. ADHD is caused by differences in brain anatomy and wiring, so it's not a conscious choice. ADHD is a common disorder that can impact on focus, impulse control, and emotional responses. This is true. We will go on to explore these things later on in the presentation. ADHD is often diagnosed in childhood, but sometimes not until the teen years or later. This is true. However, it's important to note that the ADHD symptoms would have been present early on in the child's development, and an adult cannot suddenly develop ADHD, for example. It's about how well the child can cope with what is expected of them at the time, and often when there are changes in expectations, such as moving from infants to juniors, or from year 6 to year 7, for example, the ADHD difficulties might become more apparent in comparison to their peers. ADHD is all about hyperactivity. This is actually false, because children with the inattentive type of ADHD may appear daydreamy or off in their own world. ADHD is something that most children outgrow. Again, this is false. Many children diagnosed with ADHD have symptoms that persist in adulthood. However, by then, they have usually established coping strategies, for example, by going for a run every day, or they may be in areas of work that suit their strengths and personal interests. That being said, increasing numbers of people with ADHD still require medical support and treatment in adulthood. So, ADHD is a thoroughly researched condition recognised by the NHS in the UK and across the world by the World Health Organization. ADHD affects roughly 5% of the population. It's thought that 1 in 20 children may have ADHD, so that's roughly 1 child in every class. However, it's believed that ADHD is underdiagnosed in the UK. While genetic in origin, research suggests that environmental factors such as parenting, education, traumatic experiences, brain injury, epilepsy, and comorbid cognitive impairments will ultimately determine severity across the lifespan. Genetic factors are at the root of ADHD. However, environmental factors invariably determine outcomes across a range of life chances and health. The ADHD brain is believed to be impaired in 4 functional regions: the frontal cortex, the limbic system, the basal ganglia, and the reticular activation system. These regions are involved in attention, executive functioning, organisation, and emotional regulation. People with ADHD are thought to have deficiencies of a specific neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitters are essentially chemical messengers that pass messages between nerve cells. When there are deficiencies, messages cannot be communicated effectively between different parts of the brain and sending messages to and from the brain. This all explains why we see difficulties with attention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity.
Our brain has a huge number of nerve cells. It is estimated that there are about 100 billion nerve cells inside our brain, 15 times the number of people living on planet Earth. Nerve cells all need to talk to each other to send messages to the rest of the body. The frontal lobe is the command center, just like the manager or boss of a large company. The messages from the frontal lobe and other parts of the brain go through complex networks of nerve cells. The nerve cells are connected to one another with a tiny space called a synapse. Let's call it a bridge. We need chemical messengers, neurotransmitters called dopamine and noradrenaline, to transfer messages from one nerve cell to another. Let's call them postmen. The postman would start from the first nerve cell, cross the bridge, knock at the door of the next nerve cell and drop the letters, messages, through the letterbox. The same process continues to another nerve cell, and this is how messages travel around the body. Some postmen return to the nerve cell for recycling before they get a chance to deliver more letters. This is called reuptake. In people who don't have ADHD, there is a good supply of postmen on the bridge, synapse, to continue to deliver letters, so the messages spread across the brain and around the body. ADHD can be caused by a number of factors. It is often inherited in our genes and is also influenced by the environment. The ADHD genes speed up recycling of the postman so that more postmen get back into the nerve cell. As a result, there are not enough postmen left on the bridge to deliver letters to the next nerve cell. This causes a chemical imbalance in the brain, disrupting the delivery of the message, or letter. If you don't get clear messages from the frontal lobe, the boss, you can end up with chaotic behaviours such as reduced ability to stay still, reduced attention, poorer planning, disorganisation, and acting without thinking. This would result in common ADHD symptoms of hyperactivity, impulsivity, and inattention.
Let's explore the symptoms of ADHD in more detail. As we've learnt, ADHD symptoms involve inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. Thinking about what we might see in the school environment, some examples of inattention include avoiding or being reluctant to do work that requires mental efforts over longer periods of time, struggling to pay attention during whole class discussions, forgetting what they've been asked to do, getting sidetracked during work, being distracted by things going on around them, frequently losing belongings, for example their bag, coat or water bottle, and struggling to follow a set of instructions. Some examples of hyperactivity include fidgeting or tapping with their hands or feet, or with things such as rulers or pens, squirming around in their seat, constantly repositioning and getting out of their seat, running, jumping and climbing at times when it's inappropriate. And some examples of impulsivity include interrupting on conversations and when other children are speaking or when staff are speaking, shouting out answers, not putting the hand up and not waiting to be chosen to speak, humming, singing, blurting things out, leaving the class before permission is received, pushing in queues or lines, and lashing out and getting into conflict with others. Let's have a think about how these symptoms might impact on a child's daily life. First of all, from an academic perspective, a child may struggle to learn because they're so distracted by other things going on around them or their innate need to move. Sitting still in the classroom and listening can be very challenging. From a social perspective, a child may get into confrontation with peers at break and lunchtime because they have so much energy to expel, and it can come out physically. Difficulties with filtering what they say verbally could antagonize or cause offense. From an emotional perspective, a child may feel frustrated when they cannot do the work. They might have a negative self-image and associate themselves as a naughty child. This can be reinforced when they get told off frequently. It may also lead to avoidance of these activities that they know they struggle with. Physically, a child might be very interested in physical activities and not seem tired even after hours of exercise. They often excel in PE and extracurricular sports activities. Despite the amount of energy burnt during a day, a child with ADHD may struggle to sleep due to restlessness, and this can mean that they are fatigued when in school because they've not slept well. Think about the impact of little sleep on mood and emotional resilience too. A child may be so busy and need to move that they cannot even sit still to eat a meal or watch a TV program. This therefore may impact on family routines and leisure choices. A simple trip to the cinema may be out of the question, for example. ADHD may also impact on independent skills because a child may lose focus when dressing and forget what order they need to put things on in. They may struggle to organise themselves in terms of getting what they need ready for school or clubs, or they may have difficulty remembering the order of tasks, which can make cooking and other domestic tasks challenging for older children and teenagers. This again can be frustrating for a child when peers are able to do these things without error or assistance. So it's no wonder that ADHD symptoms are only the tip of the iceberg. Research suggests that undiagnosed, untreated ADHD increases the risk of mental health problems such as anxiety, depression, addiction, eating disorders, self-harm, attempted suicide, and personality disorder. This is why it's important that we're able to recognise ADHD symptoms and ensure children get appropriate diagnosis and management. Schools that ensure all staff are trained to identify children with neurodevelopmental conditions and adapt teaching to meet those needs not only ensure better educational achievement, but also reduces learner anxiety in childhood that creates a risk of mental health problems in adulthood. So with that in mind, what questions can you ask yourself when you suspect ADHD? Is the child paying attention? Are they falling behind their peers academically? Do they forget things frequently? Do they daydream a lot in class? Are they constantly on the go, up and out of their seat? Do they avoid learning and homework? Do they struggle to organise tasks when work is set? Do they seem as if they've not slept well? Are they having frequent fallouts with friends? And how long have these things been going on for? So how is ADHD diagnosed? It involves a comprehensive assessment by a trained clinician, psychiatrist, or specialist paediatrician. The diagnosis is made using the DSM-5. A diagnosis is made when there are at least 6 symptoms of inattention and 6 symptoms of hyperactivity or impulsivity. The symptoms have to be present in all settings at all times, and they must impact on functioning. The symptoms have to be present before the age of 12, and they must not be better explained by other factors that can cause similar symptoms. How is ADHD managed? There's no cure for ADHD, but a range of management strategies can be used to help control the symptoms. Strategies should be tried slowly, implementing one change at a time and monitoring effectiveness. If too many changes are implemented at once, it can be difficult to work out what was effective and what was not. By adulthood, many people have learned to live happy, healthy and successful lives using a range of interventions and strategies that include medication, daily exercise, healthy nutrition, stress management strategies such as yoga, deep breathing and progressive muscle relaxation, and what are known as executive functioning skills to help them plan and organise their lives, especially in school and the workplace.
There are 2 different types of medication for ADHD called stimulants and non-stimulants. After you take your medication, it travels to the bridges between the nerve cells. Once on the bridge, The medication helps to stop the postman getting back into the nerve cell. Reuptake. This increases the number of postmen on the bridge able to deliver letters, and this is how the chemical imbalance may be improved by the medicines. Once the letters are transferred correctly and regularly across the bridges, your ADHD symptoms will improve, helping you control any hyperactive and impulsive behaviour and to pay more attention.
Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen to this video. Please take a look at the websites below if you'd like to find out more useful information and tips about ADHD.